All right, we are now recording. So, good evening, everyone. I'm so excited that we have a nice big crowd for this. We are trying out some virtual offerings to see what you're thinking, and we're also going to be sending out a survey not too far in the future for the CTE, asking if you like an evening session every now and again, and we will see where that goes. So thank you for being here with me. If I have not met you before, my name is Nicole Zumpano. I'm the Director of Distance Learning here at Triton, and I am over in F210. The Office of Distance Learning falls under the CTE. So you are here tonight for Accommodations, Pixels and Purpose, and Designing Digital Materials. Some of you, again, all of us are looking forward and trying to accommodate all of our lesson plans and all of our materials to make it to be compliant with the Title II regulations that are coming. So you might have seen this word accommodation and thought, okay, this is the session for me. And while I am going to talk briefly about accessibility, that is not going to be the main focus of this conversation. The main focus of this conversation is going to be on the design elements of your digital materials. So hopefully that doesn't scare anyone off. If you do feel you need a little bit more information about the ADA accessibility requirements, I am hosting a repeat session on making materials accessible in the CTE on December 2nd. So hopefully you can make that if you are interested in that. So looking forward, when we talk about design, it's very important that we're designing for all of our learners. And in the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, you'll see there's a highlighted box that's just conveniently right in the middle. You'll notice this one is focused on design. And in this particular case, it talks about the design with language and also with symbols. So while tonight's conversation focuses on many aspects of UDL, this one is most closely aligned if that's something that you are interested in. And also, a quick reminder, I will make sure that you have some presentation resources available at the end of the session. I have a few links. So any resources that you see me mention tonight, you will have access to. Don't worry about it. I'll make sure everything gets to you. So with that, we are going to move forward and talk about design. And many of us don't think about this, but design is actually a form of communication. It conveys a mood, it can hold, or unfortunately can also hinder our attention, and it actually influences comprehension. There's some research out there, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of that tonight that's woven into the presentation about how the design of your materials can influence if your students are comprehending those. Now, I know this is going to come as a great shock to all of you. I am not 21. So I remember being younger and heading into the doctor's office. This is pre-internet days, and finding those good old Where's Waldo books and being super excited, like, oh, cool, I'm going to find Waldo, and looking around and searching and searching. And then after a while, oh, it's just too much. It's too much to do. You just have to put it down because it's just frustrating you. We don't have this so much today anymore, but this is a version of today's Where's Waldo for us, where our desktops, our files, our computers, things are all over and not necessarily as organized as they can be. Those two pictures, the Where's Waldo of today and yesteryear, they have some things in common. First thing is, the way we present our materials can actually affect the cognitive load and learning retention of our students. Now, this goes into our working memory. The research, brain research, tells us our working memory can hold anywhere from around 2 to 4 bits of new information at a time. That information stays in our working memory. It's there for maybe around 20 seconds to 20 minutes. And if we don't integrate it into our long-term memory, it's completely lost and it's forgotten. So cognitive overload affects integration. When we have too much to focus on, we can't concentrate on integrating information into our long-term memory. So often it ends up lost. We know that there are some designs that contribute to cognitive overload. Now, we found that the research has told us too much text on your slide can contribute to that cognitive overload. If you have heavy designs, so if you're using slide decks that have wonderful themes, but themes that are just busy and all over the place, it can be distracting to students. Unfamiliar vocabulary. So when students are faced with content they don't know and terminology they don't understand, it can affect their cognitive overload. Too many paths out. So giving them too many different things to click on, too many videos to watch, too many places to go all at one time, again, contributes to that blockage of retaining information. And new information in large quantities. So these are some things that we already know. Basically, the more our brain needs to work to find what's important, process it, and apply it, the easier it is just to lose focus, get frustrated, and quit the task at hand. There is a principle referred to as Hicks' law out there. It's a theory that states the more choice you give, the easier it is to choose nothing. And they've done some research behind that. And one example you'll see on your screen are of grape jellies. They went into a store and they conducted a survey, and it makes reasonable sense. But the more choices that you have to choose from, the longer it takes for you to make a choice. You'll notice the image underneath that is something you'd see on a computer screen as well. Again, the more buttons and the more choices that you have, the longer it takes to make a decision. It's no different with the digital materials that we're designing to use with our students. So our goal this evening is to reduce cognitive overload. We're going to do that by taking a look at Richard Mayer's 12 Principles of Multimedia Design. Mayer is a psychologist. I believe he's still at the University of Southern California, but he came up with 12 principles of multimedia design back in 2001. And what's amazing is when you see these principles, you're going to see that 24 years later, they are still 100% relevant today. The interesting thing for me when I think about that is how different technology was back then. And it's almost like he was able to see into the future because these are so applicable to how we design today. Now, as we get into it, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I am not going to follow all the best practices that Mayer discusses. You're going to see some contradictions. Hopefully you won't call me out on them too much. And there's a few reasons for that. First off, part of it is our modality and also our timing. If we were in, say, a half-day workshop together face-to-face, we might be able to have a different type of slide deck. So the slide deck I have for you, you're going to find kind of breaks some of his principles. There's going to be a lot of information given to you at one time, but I just want you to know that moving forward. I'll also say I still struggle to implement all of these successfully. I am an adjunct instructor for 2 universities. I teach in graduate programs, and there are some of Mayer's principles that I know are best practice, and I'm still struggling to incorporate myself. So as we get going today, I just want to make that transparent and clear as we move forward. Now, let's take a look at what we know the research tells us about design. We're going to start with the coherence principle. The coherence principle tells us that students learn best when extraneous words, pictures, or media are eliminated from materials. Now, some of us, we love good old Bitmoji. We want to have Bitmojis on every page. That's too much. Another thing we know around the coherence principle, and this is very interesting, is research has found we can't read and listen at the same time. So if you are reading my slides as I'm talking to you, you're listening in the background, but you can't do both at the same time to aid comprehension, which is just interesting to know. For the signaling principle, students learn best when they're shown what to pay attention to. Now, you'll see that I have 6 different principles here on this slide. If I had every single principle up, all the content, you would be skimming through as I was talking to you. You wouldn't be directly listening to what I was saying. And at some point, I might say to you, okay, so where are we at now? You might not know where we're at. So the signaling principle gives short clues in order to help students see where they need to be. A good example is the transitions that I'm using right now. You're seeing that I'm only putting up one chunk of content at a time. That focuses your eye. It tells you what you should be paying attention to on the page. There are some other ways we can do this with design as well. You can use visual cues to highlight essential information. For example, you can bold your text, you can highlight it, and you can circle it. Now, remember that accessibility piece. We never want to use color alone to convey meaning, because for somebody who has a vision impairment such as color blindness, if you use color only, they may not be able to distinguish that importance. So if you always want to use something that is a little bit more bold out there, like that bold or that highlighted or circle text, or 2 different methods. You could have things a different color, and have it bolded. But just remember, don't use color alone. Okay, redundancy principle. Having redundant content can produce cognitive overload. Now, by redundant content, we're talking about graphics, text, and narration all at the same time that convey the same message and do the exact same thing. That being said, this particular principle, you can put an asterisk on that, because sometimes we have students that need to receive the information in multiple ways in order to comprehend it. So while I'm presenting this to you, I would not want to also narrate it, read word for word off the screen, and then give you a transcript to look at the same time. But what I might do is I might want to make that available to students so that if they did need those additional redundant pieces for comprehension, I'd be aiding them in that. Okay, the spatial contiguity principle, chunking and segmenting content. Now, again, this is an example of how I am both chunking and I'm segmenting content. I'm chunking it by putting it in bullet points. I'm segmenting it by having it broken out in 6 separate little boxes and not just one long string of text. So it's very important when you're presenting content to your students, chunk it and segment it. You also want to make sure in your design to place your text and any images that relate to those texts near each other. So for example, you'll see the picture on the left. This is what an example of spatial contiguity looks like when it's done correctly. I've got a t-shirt, so I have an image of it and then the words t-shirt, a shoe as an image, and then the word shoe, and so on. You can see the picture on the right. I've got all of my graphics to the side, and then I have my words separate. That's not going to help in comprehension. Here's another example of that. This, believe it or not, is actually considered poor design. When I have the answer key or the labels separate from the parts that they're describing. Because in this particular instance, if I want to find where the error is, I have to match the number 1 in my word list to the number 1 on the diagram or the image that I am pointing to. So breaking it up can be difficult for some students. This is more precise. It's more of a design that students can comprehend without an additional overload, because what I'm doing here is I'm taking the name and I'm putting it directly next to what is representing. So just something to think about there. Moving into the temporal contiguity principle, very similar. In this particular case, you want to have images and text appear at the same time. So if you have images and say a video, you want your voiceovers also to appear at the same time. You want everything to be lined up. I'm sure all of you have experienced at one point or another a video that might lag and you're seeing their mouth move and you're not hearing anything. And then, 20 seconds later, you're hearing that. It's very disorienting. So it's important to remember to keep your images and your text appearing at the same time. Segmenting principle, students learn best when information is segmented, not in one continuous stream. If you have a large block of text, you would segment it in short paragraphs. That would be one way you can do it. You can also segment it by breaking it up with bullet points. Another thing is it allows students to feel they have some control over learning, because when things are broken down into small chunks, there's a natural pause in between finishing one and then going on to the next piece. This is that perfect use of the next button. If you were designing, say, a self-guided presentation, or you are creating a website that your students are going to be using, you would have content, you might have images, you might have some videos, multimedia for them to watch, but you're not going to have your entire week-long lesson on one page. You're going to segment it and break it up. And again, short related chunks of content, similar to what you see here. Next, the pre-training principle. Meyer tells us with this, students learn best when they have some basic knowledge of the topic ahead of time. In education, we refer to this as scaffolding. We're building upon prior knowledge as well. You can do this with your students by front-loading definitions, terms, concepts, by saying to them, okay, hey, when we come back on Monday, we are going to start talking about simple machines. So here are some definitions, some terms you might want to take a look at. Here's a short video that you might want to take a look at before we get into the conversation. Are all of your students going to do it? No. But some of them who actually need that additional support with pre-training might take you up on this. Producing cheat sheets for your students, showing them that you are invested in helping them learn, and not just saying, I told you to read this, you need to go home and make sure that you read that on your own, or it's in the syllabus, but actually supporting them and helping them by creating cheat sheets and things that they need to know in order to understand the concepts that you're addressing. The modality principle. Visuals and spoken words are better than visuals and on-screen text. This is for your students. We're going to talk a little bit more about visuals in a few minutes, but visuals and spoken words are better than visuals and on-screen text. You do want to try the best you can to limit the amount of text on your screen, because it's absolutely natural for us to want to read what's on the screen. And there's nothing worse. I'm sure you've been to presentations where the presenter has read word for word every single slide, and they've added no additional text to that. So you want to make sure that you do try and limit text on screen. And remember, this is a good case of me not following Meyer's principles to the law. Multimedia principle, moving on. Students learn better when they're presented with words and images simultaneously instead of just words. Again, we're going to cover visuals in a few minutes, but our students are very visual. So if you want to aid them in learning, you want to present them with words and images that have to do with the content that they are learning. Be thoughtful with your image selection. That is critical here. Personalization. Information should be presented in a conversational, age-appropriate tone and language. This is also an accessibility factor. We are all very smart people. We're in academia, but we don't need to continually use language to our students that they might have a difficult time understanding. It's no different in your presentations as well. When you are recording a screencast for them, or you are demonstrating how to do something, Aim for a conversational, age-appropriate tone and language. And then we get into the voice principle. With narration, when it does come to narrating, creating videos, and so on, it should always be human. You don't want to use an animated computer voice. When it's possible, try and record in your own voice. One thing we forget, even in online courses, our students might not be in front of us in an online course. They still want to learn from us. They still see us as the expert and the person that can get them the information they need to be successful moving forward. It's no different when I'm presenting, a PowerPoint to them. If I can record it in my own voice, if I'm not in front of them, it's going to help make a connection to them. Okay, now I am going to put 3 different quotes on the screen. Don't type anything in the chat that would give them away. Don't say anything out loud, but just try and think to yourself as you read these what they mean, and then I'll explain. Here we go. Did you catch that? There's research that tells us with the voice principle that when we know someone, we actually read content, texts, emails in their voice, which is just kind of a fun fact. If you think about that, the vast majority of you, if you knew who those quotes were from, think back as you were reading them, chances are you might have read them with an undertone of the person that actually said them. Just a fun fact. Okay, and then our last principle, the image principle. Now, it's good practice, again, especially if you are remote from your students, to let them see you. You saw I had my camera turned on when we first got together and started, and then I made the design choice to turn it off for you. You do want to, again, build that rapport with your students. However, pointing out with the image principle, it's not necessary for learning to appear on camera and narrate. So while it's great for community building, just keep in mind that it's not necessary for learning. Okay, now if we were together face to face and we had a 2-hour workshop, I would ask you to share around what stood out for you, if any of those are something that you think you can apply to your practice. But for the sake of the condensed evening, we're going to go ahead and move forward. But it is something I'd like you to think about on your own. What stands out to you in the information that I've given to you already? And is there anything that you think you can apply? So just think about that as we go through. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transition into the big 3 when it comes to design. And our big 3 are visuals, color, and font. Starting with visuals, I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody in the room that today's students are incredibly visual. When we're talking about YouTube videos, there are over 1 billion hours of video watched every single day. Imagery is also incredibly important to today's visual students. And we know that there are 4 different types of graphics that are found within design. The first one being decorative. It's used the most often, but decorative images used in design don't have any instructional value. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but something to keep in mind, they have no instructional value. Then we might have relational graphics that are used to show a relationship to something, such as a chart or a graph. Representational graphics, which describe or portray content. And then finally, organizational graphics used for flow and sequence. And we are going to cover a little bit of all of that moving forward. First off, let's talk about the best practices that the research tells us when you are using visuals. Our brains, we know from brain research, are programmed to see images or moving objects first when they appear on a screen. Images absolutely positively have to have a purpose. They don't need to match your topic, but they should help your audience form a connection. So for example, when I put up this image didn't say to you, I don't follow all the rules, but you could gather from this image of somebody stepping on a grass next to a sign that says, please keep off the grass, that it implies somebody doesn't follow the rules. That's me telling you a story. It's this image having a purpose. Same thing with this one. This one was a little bit of anticipation, and you could know that something was going to be coming up that you were going to be interested in seeing. Both of those images that I used, again, didn't specifically point out a concept to you, but they both had a purpose and hopefully helped you form a connection. Think about that when you are designing and using images for your students. Another best practice is using photos to tell a story. You can even make the claim that my feet on the grass was a little bit of me telling a story. When it's possible, always try and use real people over static images or objects. Now, that's not always possible, but something to keep in mind. Students will relate closer to images of other people than they will, say, over clip art. That being said, whichever style you go with when you are designing your content, stick to the same style of image. So you don't want to have an image of people on one slide and then clip art on another slide, and then say a black and white cartoon on another slide, unless it makes sense to the content that you are presenting. Otherwise, you want to keep it clean, you want to keep it simple, and stick with the same style of images. Visual placement is also very important in design. We start with visual hierarchy, and it's the order in which the human eye perceives what it sees. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we start with images. Whenever you have images and text on a screen, we always start by looking at the images first, then our largest font, and then the rest of the content. And if I were to say for visual hierarchy, which one of these circles is the most important, many of you are going to instinctively say, well, the blue one, because it's the biggest. And again, it's important to remember hierarchy doesn't always come from size. It could also come from a call to action. Color can also be significant. So let's say, for example, I had one green circle and the other three were red. If you were able to see the colors, you might instinctively think, okay, the green must be the most important because it's a different color than all the rest. When we have a call to action, I might have text in one box. And again, if I asked you that same question to rank the circles in order of importance, you would most likely choose the one that has text today, the call to action, over size. In your designs, when you are designing for students, not every item has equal importance. Those that have great importance to the message you're trying to convey, do your best to make those to stand out. Whether it is a visual placement, whether it is a hierarchy with something larger, or it's call to action, you want to make sure it stands out. Even like the sentence that I just put up on the screen, the words stand out are in a different font and they're in a different color. So they instinctively draw your eye to them away from the other black and white text. Research also tells us that we read in either an F pattern or a Z pattern. So here's an example of the F pattern. If you were to come across this website, your eye would scan the top of the page horizontally first, then it might travel to the left side of the page vertically, and then to the middle. So that is just a natural way that our eye is drawn to text. Z as well. So we would scan over the top and then go through the middle and then down the bottom as well. These are things to keep in mind when you are thinking about the placement of the text on your slides or in any of your documents. The rule of thirds. This is often used in photography, but it also comes into play when you are designing materials digitally. And by the rule of thirds, you can see that this rectangle is broken up into thirds. And you'll notice that where the horizontal and the vertical lines meet, they're across here. You can see those symbols are bolded in the middle. What this would look like in terms of photography, it's visually appealing if you have content that falls in the crosshairs of the visual thirds. So when you're designing things, whether it's adding an image or whether it's adding important text, you want to aim to have it somewhere in those crosshairs where your vertical and horizontal lines meet. Then we look at visual placement and talking about the law of proximity. This tells us that elements that are close together are perceived as related. So I have a series of different little circles here. The way they're scattered, it doesn't necessarily convey a pattern, but if I were to place them near each other like this, it would be instinctive for you to say, okay, these must be related or have some sort of relationship to each other because they are placed like that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to place objects near each other if they don't belong together. You want to keep objects that do belong together and show a relationship in close proximity to each other. So even if we're talking about web design, having your navigation or your directions, you want to have those close to each other. Visual placement, moving on as well, taking a look at white space and negative space as well. White space is all that blank space that you see on a slide deck. You'll notice that I don't start in the upper left-hand corner and go all the way across the screen to the right-hand corner and not have much negative space. The more content you squeeze in, the more you are making your reader or your students focus on everything and they don't necessarily know where to look. So you are removing some of the cognitive overload by leaving some white space. You want to keep that in mind. You want to design your areas that remain empty and draw attention to important content only. So again, coming back to our circles, they're all grouped together. But now look at how they might change if I add a little bit of white space in between them. They still show a relationship because they are very close to each other. But again, that white space just breaks things up a little bit and can actually, believe it or not, reduce cognitive overload. Laws of symmetry. We as humans, we love symmetry, we love balance, and we look to find it where it's not. If we were together, I might ask you to tell me what this is a picture of. And many of you who I've done this before have said, well, there's 3 sets of brackets. Well, you're not necessarily wrong, but realistically, there are 6 individual brackets. Our mind and our experiences make us want to form pairs out of the brackets because it's cleaner and it's simpler and it's something that we know. With symmetry as well, we see this in nature, we see it in design, and you can see that there are different types of symmetry, whether it's a rotational symmetry, a reflectional symmetry, a glide reflectional symmetry, or a translational symmetry. One of my favorite things to talk about, and I wish we had more time, I wish we were together to talk about this, is the effect of visuals and media literacy, because media literacy is something that all of our students, no matter what the age, they need, especially now more than ever, because we are bombarded with images everywhere. And this is something that I also like to teach when it comes to design. Each one of these advertisements is very, what's the word? Very intentional with the imagery that they are conveying. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see that there is one wide door and there is one narrow door, and in between is a sign for Weight Watchers. And again, they're implying that you need a wide door to enter their program, and you're going to walk out through this narrow door. So they're very implicit in what they are trying to express in that imagery. Same thing with our logos. The top logo that's red that has a white B in it, that is for headphones Beats. So many people might recognize that symbol, the B for Beats, but it also conveys an image of a person on the side. So looking at their profile, like they would have headphones on. Amazon, we all know that Amazon logo. Notice that it has a yellow arrow under it, which implies two things. It implies that Amazon has everything from A to Z. That's why the arrow starts at A and it points to the Z. And it also looks like a smile. So again, it's just so interesting. There's so much that you can unpack with visual and media literacy. So that's my little soapbox for that. Okay, so let's go through accessibility, things that you need to be aware of when we're talking about visuals. Please always make sure that you have alternative text for every single image, including a Bitmoji, including a little teeny tiny emoji as well, including your charts and graphs. Many people don't look at those like images, but if you have a student that has a vision impairment, they might need that alternative text to understand what your chart and graph is pointing them to. You want to keep it concise, less than roughly around 250 characters. If you have an image that is decorative and you say, oh, this image, it doesn't need any alt text because it doesn't mean anything, you still have to label it as decorative. By labeling it, what you're doing is you're giving a screen reader permission to ignore it. So somebody that does use a screen reader and might have a vision impairment doesn't need to see it in order to understand the content on the screen. It also, believe it or not, allows the user to turn off images. And some of our students might not have fantastic internet connections or strong bandwidth when they are outside of Triton. So by marking your images with alternative text, they can turn off those images, still see the alt text, and it won't take so long to download if they're in a poor internet area. And then finally, you want to avoid the language of saying image of or photo of, because the screen reader will automatically say that. So that just turns out to be redundant. All right, let's transition into color. So color holds power. Color can impact our mood, and in some instances can actually affect the way that you behave. And when you see color in advertising, it's not random. It is very intentional and thought out and is set to convey a meaning. And this is the same thing that happens with your design. You want to be very intentional with the colors that you are choosing to get your message across. We have Isaac Newton to thank for creating the color wheel all the way back in 1666, believe it or not. And from the color wheel, this shows us different variations and color combinations that we can use that go together. So we don't want to present materials that have color schemes that just don't work. The general rule when you are designing is to have one primary color be about 60% of your content. You can have a second one, which is about 30%, just for visual interest to mix it up a little bit. And you are able to have an accent color, but you want to use that accent color very sparingly, no more than about 10% of the time. And I'll give you access to the resources you'll see at the bottom as well. Those are just online tools that will help you pick color schemes if that is something that you are interested in. You don't want to do this or this or this for accessibility reasons. These these colors don't go together. They can affect cognitive overload of your students. And for somebody with a visual impairment, it makes your materials inaccessible. So you don't want to do that. As a reminder, remember all the way back when we talked about signaling principles, color alone shouldn't be used to convey the importance of any materials that you have. And again, in that, we're thinking about colorblind people. You want to use things such as italics or asterisks by required information. And a good rule of thumb is always, if you have the ability, turn on grayscale so that you can see what your design looks like in black and white only. And again, that will help draw your eye to if your use of color goes away, the importance of it. And then background to text contrast, you want to use a contrast checker such as WebAIMS. These are free, available online. You want to make sure that you have a high enough contrast. So again, somebody with a sighted impairment can access your materials. All right, and then the last of the big three, let's talk about font. Now, believe it or not, you do have to be careful when it comes to choosing your font because fonts have personalities. It's not something we think about very often, but a font can set the tone for what it is that you are trying to convey. So you want to be very intentional in the font that you use because as you can see in these examples, I don't necessarily know that you'd want to go to Amanda's toddler's daycare or Jimmy's or Bob's birthday party rather, or hire somebody that used a font like this when they are designing. So keep these things in mind as well when you are designing content for your students. Yes, you definitely want to have fun with font, but you want to make sure that they are accessible. As a reminder, really you shouldn't be using any more than 2 different fonts at all, depending on the purpose and the audience. Too many fonts, again, increases cognitive overload because students are trying to figure out what in your message is important if you have so many different fonts. So you really want to keep it to no more than 2. One main font, and then you can have a highlight font. And I'll show you some examples of what that is. If you're using script or decorative fonts, please use them very sparingly with a simple, clean sans serif font so that you can make sure that the main message of your materials gets through to your students. Again, going back to that, using different ways to signal. In this particular instance, try not to use italics with bold together, and also don't use underlining. It's very messy, and believe it or not, when you have things underlined, a screen reader might interpret those as being a link, hyperlink out to more information. So you really want to avoid underlining all the time if you're able to. And then you can combine fonts. And again, I'll give you access to these resources. This is just a website that will take you to different font combinations so that you can keep an eye on that. These are some examples of different fonts. You could have a very tall and skinny main font and then a script right underneath it as your subtitle, or perhaps you want something big and bold and then something a little bit smaller underneath. But you can see these are examples of font pairings that go together and don't overwhelm each other. This also is a really neat little graphic here. This is a guide by an instructional designer, and she basically says, think about the purpose, and based on what you want your purpose to be, go ahead and choose these particular fonts. Also, many people don't know Google has it's a service called Google Fonts where you can put in fonts.google.com and you can see all of their fonts. You can play around, put in your own search term, and then see whatever you want to appear, whatever text you want to appear, you can see what it looks like in other fonts. And then hitting that accessibility piece, making sure our accommodations meet everyone. As a general reminder, you do not want to use serif fonts. Serif fonts have additional little decorative flourishes on each of the letters, and sometimes screen readers can have a difficult time comprehending those and translating those. So you want a nice, clean sans serif font that does not have those additional little wingy dingies on the end of each letter. This graphic here, this is very interesting. This came out of a research report from Adobe, where Adobe talked about online reading speeds. And what I found so interesting about it is not all of these fonts are sans serif fonts. Times New Roman, number 5 on this list, we're all very familiar with. That is a serif font. So for an accessibility purpose, it's not one that you necessarily want to use a lot, but this is just very interesting information. Their research indicates that some students can read more words per minute when a specific font is used. So that's just interesting information. Okay, let's talk about when you are developing those slide decks and we're talking about accessibility and line spacing as well. You never want to use font that is smaller than size 12 for the body of your text. You don't want to go lower than that. If you have a slide deck, you want to stick around 22 to 24 point font. I believe mine is 22, what I'm showing you here. If I went smaller than that, it would be difficult for you to see, even if we were together in a room face to face. Your line length on screens, roughly around 85 to 100 characters going horizontally. So with this, if I had a Google Doc, I might set it to 1/2 inch margins. I might use Arial font because that is a sans serif font, and I would use size 12. Spacing. For comprehension purposes, they find that 1.5 inch spacing is best. So that's interesting. Bullet lists, when you can. When you're using a bullet list, you want to add a space in between each point. Nice simple tip. In terms of readability, common fonts for the majority of your work. So again, you want to make sure that you're using a font that your students are going to have access to. Short sentences, very familiar words. We know we're all very, very smart, but we don't want to use overly fancy rather language with our students, because remember that can block some overload and some absorption long term. Be concise. We want to get to the point. Put the most important information first. Things that you really want them to know, you want those close to the top of the items that you are going to talk about, because as I'm sure you're all aware, some of you might even be fading now that we're 40 minutes into a presentation. You want to put really important stuff up front. When you are designing your paragraphs in your documents, your text should be left justified and right ragged. For a screen reader, this is the best choice. Centering text and having left and right justified text can sometimes trip up a screen reader and make it more difficult for them. You don't want to use left and right or all caps. Remember that all caps, screen readers sometimes interpret those as acronyms, and they'll read letter by letter. Paragraphs, 65 characters or less. And then wrapping up, we're going to go through some general design principles. So things for you to consider as we move forward. You want to design with the end goal in mind. Think about who you're designing for, what fonts are going to make sense, what content is going to make sense. What's your topic? Your topic and your content should drive the design. You don't want to pick just the cutest themed slide deck out there and then build your content around that. Your content should reflect your design. And then you also want to think about how your resources are going to be viewed. Are you going to be presenting on a smartboard in the classroom? Do you think your students are going to access content off of a smartphone? Are you going to print things out with them, for them? So I would advise you start with an 8.5 by 11 canvas and design around that. Try and keep most of your content a little bit into the middle, not directly right on the end, so that things don't get cut off. You want to design with intent. Don't forget about those universal design for learning principles. Think about designing for web and mobile devices simultaneously. I know not everybody wants to hear that, but many of our students are going to be checking out or at least partially accessing some of their content online. So keep your eye out. Depending on what program you are designing in, some of them will allow you to see what your content would look like on a device, on a laptop, and on a computer screen. Digital content, when you are providing important information to your students, you never want to be more than 3 clicks away from important information. So don't bury important information for your students, no more than 3 clicks. Be very conscious about how many links out you provide to additional information. Keep your design consistent. Don't forget about that white space. And also, again, remember, don't forget about those visual cues. In some of my graduate courses, I use these 4 icons, and they'd stand for listen, learn, do, and discuss. And when my students see that little ear with that little audio symbol, they know that I have a video that they need to listen to. Learn is going to be the content they need to learn. Do is going to be what they need to produce for me, and so on. And again, this just helps remove some of the cognitive overload for your students. Don't forget about using your headers in order. That's an accessibility tip. Again, descriptive links, not saying click here or learn more. Your links should always stand on their own and not have to depend on the context that surrounds them. Also, don't use your full web address as a link to text because the screen reader will read letter by letter. Avoid those super long paragraphs. You want to use subheadings when you can. It helps draw the eye. And remember, going all the way back to the beginning of this, by chunking that content, it gives readers the perception that they have finished something and then started something else. Less is always more. And then don't forget about images. Images are fantastic in your design, but not on every single slide. Bitmojis in design. Yes, not in every single slide and not every single Bitmoji you've ever made. Start with that 3x3 grid. Remember that was the rule of thirds, designed that way. Try and use bullet points as much as you can because it forces you to have less text. And then your final 3 big best practices. Every presentation is a sales pitch for your content. What's your hook? You want to make sure you have something that engages your audience to get them started. Don't forget about the power of storytelling. When you have a story to tell and connect it with your content, those real world examples go a long way with your students. And something else very important to keep in mind, you're designing from your perspective. You know your subject area, you know the content, and you have an idea in mind of what you might want to say, but always keep in mind that you should be designing for your audience, not designing for yourself. Okay, and then I'll have links to this that I will give to you as well. These are just some cool things that I've come across over the years that have to do with design. These are some posters that talk about designing for different disabilities or impairments that some students might have. Remember that image that we started about adventure waiting? Adobe actually has a product out there, the Adobe Color Extractor, where you can upload an image and it will pull out the color scheme that goes along with your image. So you could technically design a presentation around one single image. I thought that was pretty neat. These empathy prompts are great. There's a link to this in the resources as well. It'll just give you a prompt and something for you to think about in terms of design for your students' point of view. And we started out with Where's Waldo and things were crazy and all up in the air. And hopefully now at the end of this very rushed presentation that was only an hour long, you're feeling a little bit more Marie Kondo-ish like, and things are nice and neat and tidy, and you have some ideas of some things you can implement for your future digital designs. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 links for you in the chat. These are, let me copy the link. resources from everything that I talked about here in the presentation. Let me give you that one. I'm going to give you this one. You can grab those up, and I will make sure that when Laura sends an email thanking you for arriving, I give you those again. Let me stop sharing my screen. That's not going to do it. There we go. And I am going to turn off the recording. Okay. And from there, we are right at time. I am going to say good night, and I am so happy that you joined me. I know it was super crowded and rushed. I wish we were together face to face and we had 3 hours worth of time where we could take our time and go through this. And that could be an idea for another workshop where I actually have you bring some of your content and we just make sure that the design is up to snuff. So with that, again, thank you so much for being with me tonight. I appreciate you all. And if you have any questions at any point, reach out. Okay. Take care, everyone.